Hello, and welcome to our webcast, which is brought to you by the Knowledge Translation for Employment Research Center, or the KTER Center, which is housed at the American Institutes for Research. I'm your host, Ann Outlaw. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some logistics. You can find information, including the presentation slides and a text description of these slides, on our website at kter.org. Closed captioning is available if you're watching this webcast on YouTube. Simply press the CC button on the bottom right side of the screen. This is an on-demand webcast, so if you have questions for our presenter, please email me at aoutlaw@air.org, and we'll convey your message. You can also ask your question in the evaluation form, which I'll provide at the end of today's webcast. Today we'll hear an update about the Translating Evidence to Support Transitions, Improving Outcomes of Youth in Transition with Psychiatric Disabilities by Use and Adoption of Best Practice Transition Planning, or the TEST project, which is funded by the National Institute for Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, or NIDILRR. TEST is one of the 5 projects funded by NIDILRR for translating disability and rehabilitation research into practice. These are exciting projects as they practice knowledge translation strategies in tangible ways. Today our presenter will be Sloan Smith Huckabee, PhD. She is a former teacher, special educator, and a family member of a transition-aged youth with a serious mental health condition, which had its onset during high school. Dr. Huckabee has completed a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship with Boston University and the Transitions Research and Training Center at UMMS. Currently, she is serving as a consultant assisting with the development, implementation, and dissemination of secondary school transition practices based on previous research regarding practices that demonstrate improved post-school outcomes for transition-aged youth. Sloan, are you ready to begin?
Okay, thank you very much, Ann. So I'm going to talk to you about TEST and what we've done so far. So first of all, just make sure you read all of our acknowledgments because we want to give credit where credit's due for our funding. All right, so just as an overview of the project, and maybe some of y'all have seen the previous presentation about this, our plan was to develop research-informed materials for teachers to use when planning with students who have emotional and behavioral disorders in their transition to adulthood. And so once we developed the materials, the plan was then to pilot test the procedures in one school district, and that's the point we're at now. We're winding down the school year with teachers who have implemented these practices with some of their students, and we've had lots of opportunities for feedback from them, so we're in good shape with that. And the next thing was to implement and provide technical assistance to a targeted state that would adopt TEST, and our connection for doing that is with the National Technical Assistance Center for Transition. And then once we've implemented with the targeted state, our plan is to disseminate TEST at the Intact Capacity Building Institute, which would be in the spring in a couple of years, as well as on their website and the website for the Transitions RTC. So a little bit about the practices that we have targeted. First of all, the literature suggests that general education, career, and technical education courses are an important part of high school for this group of students. And those that have had a certain number of hours in these courses tend to have better post-school outcomes. Another indicator in the research of having better post-school outcomes is when the students are involved in leading their transition teams. And the third targeted practice that we wanted to incorporate into these curricula was that we wanted to work to have adult agencies represented in the transition process. Because again, the research suggests that students with members of adult serving agencies on their transition team tend to do better in terms of employment and education when they exit secondary school. So we have some partners with this grant. And the place where the grant originated was with people at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, all of whom are affiliated with the Transitions Research and Training Center. And then Mary Wagner is involved as well, and the Transition Alliance of South Carolina, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second, and Intact, which I referenced before, and in particular, Deanne Unruh, Catherine Fowler, and David Test, all people who are involved with transition for youth with disabilities. And then Joanne Stark also is one of our partners. So to begin with, and we did this last year, in year one, we partnered with an organization that is housed under the Center for Disability Resources. And there are 67 university centers for excellence in developmental disabilities, and there happens to be one here in South Carolina at the University of South Carolina. And these centers collaborate with people with disabilities and their families to try to develop paths towards more independent and functional adulthood for these people who have disabilities. And the organization under the Center for Disability Resources that we worked with really closely for our first year of the grant was the Transition Alliance of South Carolina. And as I said, it is housed at the Center for Disability Resources. And they do something that's pretty unique that I think is popping up in other places as well, but they've worked in this Transition Alliance to develop an infrastructure that creates local interagency transition teams and also supports them. So if you can imagine it looking like a pyramid a little bit, the TASC team would be up at the top, and they're representatives from state-level education organizations and disability-serving organizations that are nonprofits, and then also state organizations. So DDSN would be an example, so that would be the disabilities and special needs, and partnering just in general with all disability-serving organizations. The idea was that we would partner with these organizations, Child and Adult Serving Services, or TASC would, to serve transition-age youth with disabilities better, and also to build capacity for transition programming at state and local levels. So the idea is that the interaction can be lateral across local teams, or it can be vertical and go up and down between the state and the local teams, and also that a local team may go to a state member and ask about something and then get sent to another separate local organization, local transition team that has resources that maybe the first one could use. It's a really interesting model with two-way communication built in every step. So I just kind of briefly went over our process, and in year one we've worked on curriculum development, and we consulted with state and national partners and got feedback at every step along the way. So TASC gave us feedback on our beginnings of the curricula, and then we met with teachers who were participating in a national conference in South Carolina and got feedback from them. And also we've worked with Intact and Mary Wagner and Joanne with the content of the curricula and everything about it. In year two, what we've done was we identified district level partners and shared the curricula with them and got feedback on them, and then made adjustments based on their feedback, provided training, and have been working to provide follow-along coaching and continuous feedback from the teachers, and we're getting ready to get it from the students and the parents. Of course, when you get down to the ground level, sometimes there's some tricky things that happen. So this year they had some auditing of IEPs where they had to, be spending a lot of time getting those things in order. So, it's taken longer for us to accomplish our year two goals, but things are going nicely, and we're getting some good feedback from the teachers. And so we're pretty happy with how that's going on the district level. So I was just reviewing where we've been the last 2 years, So as I said, in year one, we had meetings and discussions with the Transition Alliance of South Carolina and feedback sessions. And one other group that I didn't mention was the Youth Advisory Board that the Transitions Research and Training Center at UMass has. They have a group of young people who received services in high school and then in post-high school, and these students or young adults have behavioral health concerns. And so as I worked on the materials, I would share them with the Youth Advisory Board, and they would give feedback on a lot of different things, on the language, on things they wish they had had access to. So in addition to our typical adult partners that we sought input from, we also went to who would have been the people receiving these services or who might have benefited from them, and tried to get their feedback, which is really a hallmark of the research, the Transitions Research and Training Center. They're very much involved with peer participatory action research. They call it PAR. So year two, we have reviewed the materials at a national conference, like I've said, and we also have worked with the school district throughout the year. And we are now at the point of interviewing participants regarding their perceived effectiveness of the curricula. So I'm looking forward to getting that information. And where we're going to go next is we will start on year three with a state level implementation, and this will notch up a little bit with our partnership with Intact, and they will be more of the providers of the technical assistance for these groups, at least as far as we've decided now. So briefly, I'd just like to speak about the curricula that we developed. As I said, there are three practices that we looked at. So we have the career and technical education that we focused on. This has been around for a long time. The Perkins Act, I think, was in the early 1900s, and what it talked about was trying to get our school students trained or educated so that they would be an effective workforce. And that's still an interest and a concern today. And those laws have been authorized and rewritten and things like that. So we kind of took that framework, this idea of providing career and technical education while they're in school, and put that together with how transition planning for individual education programs should be done for this curricula. So what that looks like is, in both situations, you would do formal and informal assessments, and then you would explore careers and then develop an individual learning plan. And across the nation, more than half of the states require that individual learning plans are completed for all students, and many also have it as an option. So these individual learning plans are similar in many ways to the individual educational program. Continuing talking about the career and technical education and extending it beyond the individual learning plans or individual graduation plans, when we think about the IEP, the individual education program, we want to spend time thinking about post-secondary education, post-secondary employment goals, and also post-secondary training goals. So, because education might be a college or it might be training for a job. So we want to think about all of those things. And as students progress through high school, these career and technical educations can also be used to address things that are historically problems for this population, including underestimation of career potential, and that would be of all stakeholders. A lot of times these children or these young adults don't really think that they may be able to do anything if they've really been, given a disability identity. Some of them also have unrealistic career plans, like they expect that they're going to go play in the National Basketball League or something. Promoting the consideration of higher education is another piece of this planning, as well as combating the discouragement of people with psychiatric disabilities from pursuing work. So they may not have that identity by the time they start, before they leave high school, but often once a person begins to receive disability, it's something they continue to do for the balance of their working lives. So the idea is that by planning and helping them envision a future, we can avoid some of these poor outcomes and things that in particular are associated with emotional disturbance and behavioral health concerns. So the next one that I'd like to talk about is student-led IEPs. And what we know is that students who take a leadership role in their transition planning have higher rates of post-secondary education employment. And we think that that's probably because of the increase in self-advocacy and self-determination and also disability awareness that comes with knowing enough about yourself to be able to run your IEP meeting. And there is a range of ways that students can be involved. So they may be at sort of a level 1 where they just talk about their disability and share their strengths and challenges. Or maybe they read from the IEP goals for transition planning and talk about that, and as well as doing the level 1 things. And by the time you get up to level 3, the student would be able to do most of the work in talking about their strengths and their needs and their goals and the ways that they're going to measure their progress to the goals, and et cetera. So the more involved they are, what the research shows us is the better the outcome for them once they graduate or exit school. So these benefits are, way beyond just doing better post-secondary in their post-secondary lives. It helps promote a connection between the student and the adults in their lives. It helps them feel like they have some agency or some control in what happens to them and what's going on. It encourages families to be more engaged, because a lot of times with this population, these parents are not much interested in coming up to the school. They've been up to the school for a lot of negative reasons. But most people are really interested in coming to see if their child's done something, and see what they've worked on. And so it does engage families and promote their involvement more. It also gives a great opportunity for these students to be successful, because oftentimes they don't experience success. Helps them with social skills, learning to introduce themselves and talk comfortably in front of a group. And it also encourages them to imagine a life they would like to have and build a dream for the future, which is really important. The next one, and this is the last practice that we focused on, was community partnerships. And the idea is that there are a couple of big things that happen to these young people when they exit post-secondary school. First of all, there's often a cliff during that transition period when child services end and the adult services may or may not begin. And even if adult services do begin, sometimes the kids fall through the cracks. I like to think about it as like mind the gap. If we pay attention to this gap, maybe we can help them have a seamless transition from child and adolescence to adult services. So the other consideration is that students who receive transition assistance from between 3 and 6 community agencies are more likely to be employed than those with fewer community agency involvement or fewer community agencies involved. So it seems like that the better the planning and the more people that have thought about what might be important to be ready for it, the better the employment outcomes are. At least the research seems to indicate that. So we developed a checklist as a part of the curricula for people to think about as they're planning. And you can see some of those things on the list there, from inviting community partners to the annual meeting to finding ways to engage those partners throughout the year with the student. And it might mean that what you're finding out is how to connect a student so that they get their name on a waiting list or they get established as a client or anything like that. But just the idea of having community partners involved and thinking of the different ways that they might be able to assist the student with being independent when they graduate is an important practice. So we created a checklist, and hopefully it'll give people lots of things to think about to find ways to do this. So for this year, the way that we did the implementation training was we planned a one-day training. So this year we had 4 teachers involved in the training and 2 administrators. One was a district level administrator, the other a school-based administrator, and the teachers were from different school settings. So 2 of the teachers were at a high school that had one as a self-contained teacher and the other as a coach, somebody like who would do pull out with them and help them with different things and making sure that they got their work done for all their classes. Then we have a teacher who has a lot of students with learning disabilities and maybe on the autism spectrum, but also kids who have behavioral health issues and have goals relating to behaviors in their IEP. We spent 2 hours per curricula, so it was a 6-hour training. It was a long day, and what we did to try to make the teachers feel like we appreciated their time and to do something that doesn't usually happen for them is that we brought in lunch, and so that was kind of nice because they hardly ever get to go out for lunch. So they had a whole day of just doing training, and they had a lunch from this kind of cool little meat and 3 restaurant that that people like to go to apparently there where they are. And throughout the training, the teachers were very engaged, and they asked lots of questions and provided a lot of feedback to me as I was doing the training. So I felt like that they really were interested in using this. So we're looking forward to getting to continue working with it. As far as follow-along coaching and technical assistance and evaluation goes, I have had meetings with all the training participants since the initial training. I have not yet done, but the plan was to be available for side-by-side work. And actually I have a plan to work with a couple of teachers this summer in preparing the curricula so that it's easily accessible to the students as they do some independent work. So I'm anticipating that this side-by-side work will continue beyond the first year when we were piloting. The IEP meetings with transition plan included, we were not able to get to that. Again, they've had a lot of issues with their compliance on their transition plans this year, ironically enough, the thing we're working on. So we've had discussions about the IEP meetings, and they've been pretty interesting. And we've had a questionnaire about implementation that we are working on getting the feedback from. The emails from places other than the district office sometimes go way down the totem pole, but they've been pretty responsive in talking about the usefulness of the curricula and things like that. I think when you get down to the on the ground level, this stuff gets harder to do like you plan to do it than it was to plan it the way we did. But we have been able to get feedback continually from the teachers and have a plan for continuing to do that even through this summer and on into next year. I have appointments happening not next week but the week after to talk with students and parents about their experience of using these curricula. So we're kind of in the throes of the follow-along teaching and evaluation. And the last thing that I wanted to be sure to cover, because if you're interested in this, I think it's really important to know that transition planning is a really tricky thing for teachers, and some, no doubt, know how to do it really, really well. And then there's some who don't know a lot about how to do it. I think most teachers want to do a really good job for their students. I haven't encountered very many that seem to be other than that. But the challenge with transition planning is that it is something that's required in the law under IDEA, and there are some specific things that teachers are required to do, and there's actually a checklist that goes with those things. And you can see that over on the right hand of the screen. It's called the Indicator 13 checklist. And so there is this idea that if you go through that checklist and you can check off that you did every one, then you're in compliance with the law. But I think we all know that there is a gap between compliance and substance or substantive planning happening. And the teachers, though, often don't have the tools to do the substantive work with the students. And so it was our hope to help them bridge that gap and go from, meeting the compliance requirements to really and truly implementing best practices and easily being able to access resources to do that, and also improving their knowledge base about what improves outcomes for students. So it's really been an adventure trying to get that knowledge together, and it's been eye-opening sometimes at how many resources we have available that people are unaware of, and I think that's partly because they're so busy, and also partly because, as they were going through their training programs, they, didn't get a lot of opportunity to look at it. And again, that's all about time crunch and getting all the curriculum that they have to cover in each class covered. So there's just a lot for them to know and not a lot of time for them to get to know it. So we believe these things are helpful, and the teachers seem to be really pleased to have the helpfulness. And I included a thing on here about a transition plan equals a high school IEP. I was supervising a student in a field placement, and I asked if the student had gotten a chance to see a transition plan, and the girl looked at her cooperating teacher, and the cooperating teacher said, oh, that's just a high school IEP. And so I think that speaks, and this was a good teacher, somebody who connected well with the kids and was doing good work for them, but, this teacher had a limited amount of knowledge about what the transition plan was for and what it should look like. So I think this is important work that we're doing, and it seems like the teachers are really hungry for the information and glad to be getting it. So our next steps, year 3, I've already talked about, will be the identifying the state partner, and we think that we have identified one to work with. And so continue to be getting iterative feedback and working on the curricula to try to make them as user-friendly as we can and as clear. And also coaching and training will be a part of year 3. And then years 4 and 5 will be all about evaluation and dissemination. So that's where we stand right now. And so the objectives of this grant, just to sum up, the idea was that we would support teacher capacity for substantive transition planning, so going beyond Indicator 13, and also developing their awareness and increasing their use of available transition resources, and also getting students and community partners more involved, and parents as well. Lastly, we want to make sure that they're getting that CTE coursework, because that seems to be helpful in improving employment outcomes. Having them increase in engagement in post-secondary education, training, and employment, and that can only happen for these kids with good planning. And also helping the students connect with appropriate adult-serving agencies when they exit secondary school. That's a really important thing. What we're hoping is for increased outcomes in student capacity and engagement, improving transition plans and student engagement in their post-secondary activities, and also helping teachers be able to do that better, the planning, and also decreasing the reliance on public assistance that students have due to employment or the lack of employment. And this population is more involved with law enforcement than any other disability population. And we want to make sure, too, that they don't fall into gaps between child and adult services. So I've already mentioned that we have plans. We're meeting with our potential partners next week at the Capacity Building Institute, and we'll start working with that group in 2017 if everything goes well, and implementing our year 3 activities this coming school year.
Well, thank you very much, Sloan, for sharing this update about the TEST project. Before we close today, I wanted to invite all of you to fill out a brief evaluation form of this presentation. You can find the link here on the slide, and you can also find it on our website at kter.org. You may ask your questions to Dr. Huckabee on this evaluation, or feel free to email me at aoutlaw@air.org, and I'll be sure to get those questions to Sloan. So again, I'd like to extend a big thank you to Dr. Sloan Huckabee for her presentation, to all of you for listening to today's presentation. We appreciate the support of NIDILRR to carry out today's webcast, as well as all of our other center's activities. Thank you. Have a good day.